Terrific. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. And well, Iowa Business for Clean Energy, we started about a year ago. It's really designed to help kind of encourage dialogue as much as anything. One of the things we're going to talk about, kind of the challenges that Iowa's facing, and the opportunity that Iowa has. We acknowledge we sort of don't necessarily have answers, but we know there's some important questions to be had. Stacey, we go ahead and throw the.
Yep, I'm gonna go ahead and
go to this. We'll share this PowerPoint. Go ahead and.
Oh, I gotta show you the screen first here.
Go up to the left, top left.
I gotta share over on this side first. Hold on one second. This. Okay. All right, can everyone online see the screen here?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. All right. That's all yours.
You can go ahead and go to the second page.
There.
So kind of the premise that we formed and working under is that, you know, for a company that has a low carbon footprint at a low cost is going to have a competitive advantage moving into the future. We're already seeing that now. A variety of reasons for that. One is customers are demanding it, employees are demanding it, and more, if you're a large corporation that relies on outside investors, investors are demanding it. In fact, we've had a couple of conversations in the past year with some Iowa Fortune 500 companies that have recently elevated that focus to report directly to the CEO, and both of them indicated it wasn't customers and or employees, although that's important. It's actually the investors that were forcing them to really look hard and start focusing on reducing their carbon footprint. So we realized if we could help foster an environment in Iowa that enables that to happen at that low cost, our businesses are going to be at a better competitive advantage. And so, as I mentioned, we just want to help kind of start this dialogue. We think that Iowa needs to look and change the way we're regulating our electric grid. The answer to that is going to be complicated. It's not simple. We're not saying we have the answers, but we're saying we need to kind of pull all the stakeholders involved and have a dialogue on that. And it's particularly important for Iowa businesses to be engaged in that dialogue. So one of the things we want to highlight, in 2010, the Energy Information Administration goes and they have an average kilowatt hour that they actually have a monthly report, and then you can go to their February report that shows year to year from the year before what the average kilowatt hour was paid in the three different categories that electric rates are charged at. Industrial is the one, commercial, which is more the medium to small business, and then residential. Those are the three main rates. In 2010, Iowa's average commercial rate was over 10% lower than in Illinois. In 2020, Iowa's rate was 14.4% higher than Illinois. That's a 25% swing.
Is that because ours has gone up or yours has gone down?
I assume ours has gone up more than Illinois. That's a great question. I'd have to look at that.
That's apples and oranges too. Illinois is deregulated and Iowa's not.
Illinois is deregulated. They have, but again, that's what's the average rate being paid on a kilowatt hour in Illinois overall versus Iowa. So from that perspective, I think it's comparing apples to apples in the energy information. So, and acknowledging those rates can vary by 50% from one community to another within Iowa as well. So, you want to, here's in 2020, here's those average rates. Now, Minnesota and Wisconsin are a little higher than Iowa, so I didn't put those up, but those surrounding states, that gives you a little idea. Again, that's the average rate paid by a commercial business. Again, that's more the medium to small, not the large industrials. In comparison to these other states, that's the average kilowatt hour paid in 2020. Stacy, go ahead. You can.
There you go.
Oh yeah, Stacy. Oh, you
You're
did.
good?
Okay.
Okay.
Now this is a chart I found, and this kind of shows that rates can change. This is actually Mid-Am's residential rates and Alliance residential rates over the past 20 years. Now you can see at one point they were fairly equal. That's changed over time. And we show that not because, you know, to be negative towards Alliant. I mean, they have other challenges that Mid-Am doesn't face because of the geographic market they have in Iowa. But at the same time, we show this to show you over time, the trajectory of rates can also change over the next 20 years. So we do this more for us to think not so much where rates are today, but where do we want our rates to be 20 years from now? Stacy. And why this is important is because when rates for a community are 50% higher than your neighbor, it makes it more challenging from an economic development perspective. Because obviously, if it's a business where electric rates are a key component of their expense, they're going to have to look at that. And why this is important to have this discussion now, because as transportation electrifies, then all of a sudden, that difference is going to be magnified. For a local business that's perhaps doing local regional transport and their plan, if in 15 to 20 years those trucks are electrified, and they want to be charging at their home base and their rates are 50% higher than their competitor down the street, again, that's going to magnify the competitive disadvantage. And that's why this is an important economic development issue for us to start having the dialogue. What can we do to change the way we regulate to encourage, to make sure that trend that we saw Iowa versus Illinois over the past 10 years doesn't continue, but in fact, hopefully reverses. Let's talk about how the grid is changing. Over the past number of decades, the way we've regulated our electric grid, you know, I think worked probably fine. It was much more simpler process. You had several large power plants that would feed a given geographic area. The grid of the future isn't going to look like that. Or think of it as an energy cloud, where you're going to still have some major power plants. 15 or 20 years, they may be more wind and solar field power plants, or nuclear, or however that may work out to be. But you're also going to have hundreds and thousands of solar installations on rooftops of businesses and homes that are, again, able to feed the grid. Over the next 10 years, as battery prices come down, you're going to see more and more businesses with battery storage that can be tapped by the grid as needed. You're going to see the electric vehicles. I know electric vehicles in Iowa has stirred a little bit of controversy over the past year or two because of the threat that poses to ethanol. And while I think it will have an impact on ethanol, and we can talk about, I think there's also other opportunities for vegetable oil that are really going to be exploding for the next 10 years. But whether or not on that issue, it doesn't matter how Iowa feels. The fact of the matter is transportation is more likely than not going to be electrifying over that time. And that's going to have a big impact and has big potential for our grid. So one of the things, innovation is happening really, really quickly in this front. The levelized cost, again, that's studies get done that take in both the short-term operational costs as well as the capital costs involved, and they put a levelized cost on the various different forms of energy generation. So right now, this is nationally scale solar, utility scale solar, is $45 per megawatt hour. And this is per a Wall Street Journal article just a week ago. Wind is at $48. Now, again, these are national numbers. I think if you looked at Iowa, wind would actually be lower than that. Solar may be a little higher, I'm not sure. But it just does depend on what part of the country you're in. But coal generation, that average levelized cost is $55 now. It's higher than the levelized cost of solar and wind. What a change. It used to always be perceived that coal was the cheap form of power. That's no longer the case. Now, it's more reliable, it's more consistent, right? So that's still an issue.
Is coal come because of what's used, is the coal price coming down though? I haven't really heard.
I don't know. I know there was a spike in coal prices this past 4 or 5 months, but I'm not sure about that.
Wouldn't you think it's a usage go down, that the price would go down?
Well, I think there's probably more cost than just the coal. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Storage, lithium batteries were at $12.37 per kilowatt hour in 2008. They're almost a tenth of that on average in 2020. And I can tell you this past year, Tesla has been selling lithium batteries for 80 per kilowatt hour. But what really, when it comes to the electric grid, the really exciting news has been announcements over the last couple of weeks about iron air exchange batteries, some breakthrough in the technology there, that they're projected in the next few years to, they're going to be able to have utility scale solar at $20 per kilowatt hour. These batteries will be too bulky and big to put in a car, but they'll be perfect for the grid. So there's a significant change happening right now that's going to impact, and has the impact of our grid.
Can we ask questions as we go, or is this?
Oh, yeah, please do.
Sorry.
Yeah, let's have
Sorry, just curiosity. So are we assuming the assumption for the 45 and the 48 per kilowatt is an amortized cost because of the infrastructure and?
I assume that's the study, and that's somewhat consistent. There's a well-known consulting firm that does this annually, Lazard, I think is how you pronounce that. I know those costs are pretty consistent with what Wall Street Journal reported, and yes, they do.
So that's an amortized cost.
Amortized cost with the.
My understanding from this is when they stack these up, when they do their bidding every day, wind and solar is literally nothing. They're getting the cost associated to what coal is generating. So everybody in that stack is getting that entire profit associated. Correct? When the bid process go through, who's going to be online that day?
Oh, yeah. So
those preceding costs associated, technically solar after the infrastructure is in and paid for, that's technically a zero gain, or I mean, zero cost.
Yeah, right.
And it's just profit.
Right, that's right, that's
Okay.
right. Yeah, that's right. It's got the low operational, but the higher upfront capital cost.
Yes.
Yep.
And that cost is being borne by us long-term. And that's why they're associating the 45 and 48 to the customer.
Yeah, right. I mean,
I'm trying to understand.
That's right. They're amortizing that capital cost in those average numbers.
All right.
Correct. Absolutely.
All right.
It's not the marginal cost, which I think you're.
Yes. Okay. That's what I was
Right,
thinking.
right. Not the marginal cost. And that includes the coal generation. That's not cheap because the coal plant's already built. That's building in those capital costs.
Is coal versus natural gas approximately the same right now?
Natural gas has gone up in the last so many months, but I know on these averages, I believe that was lower than actually all three of these possible. I believe.
Sure, I'm not.
As of last year, natural gas, I believe, was lower, at least lower than coal generation. Good question.
And Bob, just for your sake, so this is Jarek Lucky, and he runs Iowa American Water for us locally here.
Oh, yes. I actually represent Iowa American.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
So I get a grill it out. I get an opportunity to grill it.
Exactly. I just said, I should have noticed, and I knew you looked familiar. You obviously know your energy.
Little bit.
Issue too.
Is this the right one here then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So here's the thing. So in 2025, the combined capacity of customer-sided solar, this isn't the solar that the utilities are putting in. This is a resident or a business, customer-sided storage, demand-side management, that's controlling when you're going to use this power, electric vehicle infrastructure, and other distributed energy resources in the United States. That combined, just in a few short years, will exceed today's combined capacity of coal and nuclear power. So there's a significant potential here. And a recent Brattle study projects that 20% of our peak demand, and by the way, electricity is most costly at the peak. Those are the hot July days, is when, if you look over the course of a year, is when energy use is at its peak. That's the most expensive form. The Brattle group, again, a big consulting firm, estimates that by 2030, 20% of that peak could be addressed by cost-effective load flexibility, meaning encouraging people to use energy overnight or earlier in the day when energy is in lower demand. This number, undoubtedly, I don't know exactly what some of their assumptions are, but vehicles are going to be a big aspect here for this. And then number 3, technology is creating significant opportunities for energy efficiency. One of the things I want to highlight here, because I think it stresses the importance of why we need to have a dialogue about how we need to kind of change the approach. The Department of Energy just put out a report on 3 major pilots that were done around the country on implementing a new voltage optimization technology. Voltage optimization controls how voltage, I'm not an expert here, I know enough to be dangerous, to put creates a more consistent voltage into a residence or business. The result of that is you need less kilowatt hours to operate the same equipment within that building. The results from these pilots showed a 2 to 3% reduction in the kilowatt hour usage. And these 3 pilot projects showed a 5-year payback on that investment. So it's a good payback. The challenge in Iowa right now is we more or less penalize our investor-owned utilities for investing in this, the way our current structure is. So we need to have a dialogue about how we can change the game so that our investor-owned utilities actually have an incentive to move forward and make these type of investments to help reduce our energy costs, and at the same time, they shouldn't be penalized by doing so.
I guess I worry about reliability. If the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow, we still expect power.
Exactly.
We better get it.
Yep.
I mean, we want to be a third world country.
And that's a very important issue. I mean, that's where, why all of a sudden things are getting complicated real quick. As storage goes down significantly, if you're going to retire a coal plant, we better have storage so that we can store the wind when, instead of right now, they dial down the wind turbines in Iowa for a good portion of the time because they can't use that energy, right? We want to be able to store that energy so that when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, as well as the other piece, and I know that the recent infrastructure bill that passed has a big component in beefing up our our transmission lines.
Mhm.
You know, they show the studies that right now, at 3 o'clock, Pacific time in California, they have too much energy because everybody has solar on their rooftops. And, even though that's somewhat of a heavy energy time, there's so much solar being developed, they have plenty of energy at that point. Well, if that could be shipped over here, but then later in the day, they need, you know, when wind's blowing, California may need more energy. And again, that's when, as part of that, you need to levelize the use. Wind still blows at night. Let's be charging our cars in the future on that. It's something you wouldn't want to go, and I don't think we could go today on that. It's a discussion, maybe nuclear, it is, you know, that there's a lot of work going on there to see if that's a long-term solution, that part of the solution to that base.
Well, don't we have a lot of natural gas peakers right now?
Yes, I think, but I think Alliant is converting some of their plants now to, that'll be peaker plants from coal to gas.
You know, then they could probably charge whatever they want too.
So,
Just, I mean, just for reference, those speakers, I mean, we switched this to, natural gas, and it, only time it ran was when we tested it. So, just.
Illinois got a bunch of peakers, so.
See them on 88, yeah. And they're there for reliability if they need to, and if they are gonna run, it's gonna be costly. It's not gonna be cheap, so.
So versus no power.
yeah,
When we had that Arctic blast, whatever it was, I mean, that was a true example of what can happen even. Because, you know, everybody, you know, had scheduled wind power and the wind wasn't there. And so it was just a matter of, we have to call an electric interrupt in the middle of winter. It's a little crazy.
yeah, absolutely. And that's why, one of the things we're stressing is it's important to start realigning the incentives. Right now, over the last few decades, the way electric grid has been regulated, I think was fine under that structure where you don't have all these outside forces having to come in. The regulation is they get reimbursed for their operational costs, and that gets reviewed by the utilities board. They then get to capitalize their capital costs. They then get a profit on top of that, but that profit is based on a percentage of the capital costs. Under the old structure where you just have some main power plants feeding into a given geographic area, that makes sense. That's a good way. The challenge is when you have all these third parties out there, you have third-party generators, you have storage, you have the vehicles, you have this explosion of innovation that would allow greater energy efficiency that we want to tap into. That incentive structure needs to be modified. We don't want to penalize our investor-owned utilities because we without you know, just decide not to locate here. So though that's the discussion, that's the dialogue we want to have. I know I got some more, we don't have to worry about those extra slides.
Well,
There we go.
I just want to make sure we're online. Is it, I don't know.
Let's keep going for a few more.
Okay.
Are we switching our directive
Go
from
ahead.
ethanol to
Oh, it's right there.
wind and solar? Between like incentives associated to ethanol that our current state subsidizes to make it look cheap and appealing, even though it's not. Are we changing that mentality?
I would say that I don't think, I think those can be two separate issues. I think, Iowa's support for biofuels, can continue and is separate. In fact, in many ways, there'll be, as transportation electrifies and ethanol is needed less, there's actually going to be a higher demand for something called like renewable diesel for the next few decades, and sustainable aircraft fuel. That is actually going to be huge, that people are underappreciating right now. I also represent truck stops, so I share the full diesel fuel.
No, you're fine, you probably can't.
Tom knows that, right?
I'm just more curious on ethanol, if you actually think that is actually efficient. Because we're substituting one issue for another. We're taking up agricultural land for food and crops. We're using a 10-to-1 ratio for every 10 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of ethanol. Your efficiency from regular fuel, which let's say you got a car that's 30 gallons or 30 miles a gallon, now you're down to 27 miles a gallon. And you're subsidizing the actual cost of 10 cents off by state funding.
I'll jump into one complicated issue at a time.
It'd just be great to.
If it's okay if I sidestep that.
Yeah, good idea. Good idea. All right.
I wanted to throw out some different things that other states are doing, and these are the kind of conversations I think we need to have with all the stakeholders sitting around, really talking through and evaluating what other states are doing. Performance incentive structures, so not changing dramatically how things are regulated, but building in to the rate-making process different performance incentives, so profits are not just solely based on a percentage of capital assets, but they can be based on how rates progress over the coming so many years. You could base it on increase in energy efficiency. There's a number of things that states are starting to build in that either have or starting to. It's a fairly new area, but many states across the country are pursuing more performance incentive structures in that rate making. There's also a whole variety of ways that states insert competition into the process. Back about 20 years ago, there was a big push into deregulating, where you actually can have different companies competing for both at the wholesale level as well as the retail level, and that's what was referred with Illinois. I know they have wholesale, retail. I'm not sure if it's wholesale or if they have competition at the retail. I don't know if it's at the wholesale level as well. Not an expert on that. But Texas is a very decentralized state. If you don't do it right, or deregulated state, if you don't do it right, we all saw what happens to that. So that's got to be done very carefully. But there's others beyond just deregulating that, and other steps that states do to just insert some more competition into the process. And this becomes, these become options that I think Iowa needs to really start looking at, because of the fact that it's easy for many different sources to not only generate energy, but control how much energy they want to use at a given time. And so there can be a lot of private sources bidding in to make sure that our energy grid has the level of energy necessary.
Do you feel we're going more towards co-ops and the infrastructure itself and getting away from the actual generators?
Ask that question again. Make
So
sure.
the co-ops that are actually got the infrastructure for the distribution system, is the infrastructure bill, you see stuff moving more towards the grid system itself, as you said, with California and the shifts for the need. So it's cloudy here, but it's not cloudy in Nebraska. That infrastructure is coming. The focus is more on that said infrastructure than it is the actual generators.
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know if it's more, but it's becoming and there's more of an emphasis. I think when you say the co-ops, you mean like the regional
Yeah,
markets?
Cedar Rapids, that co-op that's up there. All the
Oh, that
regionals.
co-op.
So they got generators and the co-op associated to other, to bid out to the next location.
I think I.
So I know you
I
didn't
should say I'm
request
not
for
quite
proposals. I know you didn't request for proposals, but those new capacities and requirements. I guess I don't know where I'm going with that question, sorry.
This area gets-
I got a lot of thoughts here.
This area gets complicated really quick.
Yeah.
There's several areas where you could, it's still competition. It's not necessarily competition on a day-by-day basis. But it's, hey, we're gonna need X more generation over the coming 5 years. You know, should we open it up to other third parties to bid on that generation? Or the city of Clinton has an infrastructure, it's limited in the amount of electricity that can be here without a big investment. Are there other third-party alternatives that would suggest, you know, the traditional way would be, you know, for the utilities to invest in infrastructure to put more capacity in here? Well, maybe a third party would come in with an alternate solution that would say, no, we can do community solar here, which would relieve the transmission bottleneck. And we have 3 large industries that will agree to curtail their power on hot July days and move more of that power overnight on those hot days. And that will result in addressing the bottleneck or potential bottleneck issue. So those type of things are going on in other states. Alliant actually did a form of that on its own up in Decorah, where they had a bottleneck with the transmission going into Decorah, and it was going to create problems because they were putting, I think, a new solar installation. I may have this confused. So instead of having a big investment in new transmission capacity there, they are doing a storage solution that will be less expensive. So there's an example that's already happening in Iowa, but we need to have that happen in a much more aggressive way for the grid of the future. So great discussion. Other questions?
I would just mention for Bob's sake that, so we have an industrial park here, a certified site, and we refer to it as Project Circuit. But Project Circuit has optioned 10 acres of land at the industrial park with the idea that eventually they will build an energy storage facility, that they would store the energy in batteries. And that's a whole process. And we're probably over a year into that. They optioned the land last April in 2020. So it's, you know, it's been a while. But apparently there are companies out there that are looking at that storage issue.
Yes. Like I mentioned, just in the last 6 months, there have been several announcements on some, the key is having that utility type scale solar. Again, it doesn't have to be compact, it doesn't have to be lithium. The iron air exchange batteries are very exciting because they don't rely on materials that are limited, right? Mm-hmm. Iron is plentiful, mm-hmm. Air is plentiful. It's just getting that technology right, and then of course and getting the cost down. Mm-hmm. So you're right. It's going to be a big explosion in storage in the next 5 to 10 years, which helps address the reliability issue of our renewables. Mm-hmm.
So with that storage piece, is there, I don't know if it's more of an Alliant or a Mid-American question, but is there a large issue with loss between your C factor from where your battery is to where you're actually consuming it? So between that loss there, are they dealing with that, or is that loss not sufficient enough to or is it the loss there?
That's a great technical question. I know with transmission, yeah, you lose more, and they're trying to work to reduce that. I think this is where I start to get dangerous. DC, I think, has less loss of transmission than AC, I think, and they're trying to do more DC lines. I might be butchering that. But by the way, there's a great historical fiction book called The Last Night of Darkness. It's about the battle between Edison and Westinghouse and Tesla for the battle of AC versus DC power. Highly recommend it. Gives you a little insight into Tesla too and his.
Do you know that we've got a 1,700 acre solar farm? They're getting ready to come to the county with a permit, but it's my understanding this power is going out of state, isn't it, Dan?
Well, yeah,
The power's gonna go everywhere.
Mhm.
that's what I was gonna say. I think it's out the bid at that point, basically. Is that
Yes,
correct?
Correct. And I mean, and NextAir is on the call and they're the experts on that, but customers that are looking to go green, can do a PPA, so they could be anywhere. And when that solar is available, they can, and then those recs will get retired to that customer and they can consider themselves. But I would ask the experts, not me. I'm not an expert.
If I was just thinking, if we're building this to go to the power out of state, is that a plus or a minus for the county?
It doesn't go out. There's 3 grids. I know they talked about it. There's a you got the coastal and then the Midwest, and then of course Texas on their own grid, which failed them. So it stays here until it's bidded out properly. Doesn't go anywhere.
So I think you're referring to, they'd be bidding into the MISO market. MISO is the regional market that Illinois and 6 or 7, a number of other states in the Midwest.
It could stay here.
I'm not the,
As bidded.
So the power is gonna go to the MISO grid, they're bidding into the MISO grid, but the RECs, the renewable energy credits that give you saying that you're green, so the people, just, anybody, that's just going into a bucket. So everybody's pouring their electricity into the bucket, we don't know where that electricity goes, but to get credit for that, I'm trying to make it really simple.
Yeah.
To get credit for that, you have to own this REC saying that, you know what, I bought that helped produce that green power.
And that's the benefit to local companies if they can say that. I mean, that's, from the manufacturing side, from the economic development side. So we have the industrial park, and as we get leads in from larger manufacturing companies, they're already asking us now in the last year, almost every single one of them, if they're a larger manufacturer, can I have access to renewable energy if I locate in Clinton? I mean, that's like a standard question these days. So we have to be able to answer that, and it's not an easy answer. The other thing that you probably are not aware of, the city of Clinton imposed a 4% franchise fee in Clinton as of last year. So, for electricity rates, no matter how well Lion or RAC or somebody can offer a rate, they still have a 4% additional fee they have to pay on their electricity. So we have to be transparent about that in all of our submissions as well. And that's, that's a challenge for us right now.
Understand. So one of the things that we're going to be hosting is a summit here this spring. We haven't nailed down a date. We keep kind of moving our thought process. I think we'll probably target the end of April, I think, that's the thought process, and we'll try to nail that down the next week or so, where we bring in some experts, invite all those who want to be part of that dialogue to be part of probably 5 or 6 hours, so we kind of have people talk about what's going on in other states, what are ways to help kind of revise the way we regulate and the pros and cons of those, and maybe hopefully have that start a process, perhaps an informal process where we kind of come up and start having a dialogue of how do we go ahead and revise how we regulate this so we can align this new grid of the future and with the proper incentives for our electric utilities.
So what role does Iowa Business for Clean Energy, like what role would you play in that?
Well, right now we're just playing, kind of making sure businesses are aware of what's been happening in Iowa from a competitive standpoint and why it's really important in the future that we start thinking about this. And then we're trying to sort of get that conversation started and inject different ideas of what we can do to change the way we regulate. So that's sort of our role right now. Whether that evolves, whether we'll grab onto a certain issue in the future and a certain way to change that, I don't know.
Okay. Bob, I just want to give a chance, we have a number of people on the line, just wanted to give them a chance for a second if anyone had comments or questions for anyone who's online with us right now. Okay.
IowaCleanEnergy.org is our website.
Mhm.
You can sign up for our newsletter and we'll kind of keep you updated and let you know when our summit that we hope to have this coming spring, when that'll be. And feel free, Jared, maybe you could send around my contact information.
Sure, yeah,
So I
absolutely,
want everybody to feel free to contact me.
absolutely.
So thanks for your time this morning.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
the opportunity.